Okay, it's 1 o'clock, so let's get started. Thank you for joining us today for DTE Energy's 4th public open house on our updated Clean Vision Plan. My name is Pete Turnus, and I'm Manager of Corporate Communications at DTE Energy, and I'll be moderating today's event. I want to go over a few things before we get started. Today's presentation, as well as the question and answer session, will be recorded. We will post the recording on our website at dtecleanenergy.com. We'll also have instructions at the end of today's open house on ways you can provide comments and recommendations for our Clean Vision Plan. Questions or comments can be submitted anytime during today's event by using the Q&A function at the top right side of your screen. We will queue up audience questions and comments after the presentation is complete. We will have several subject matter experts here that you can see in the attendee list. They're on hand to answer your questions. In instances where the appropriate expert is not present, we will respond to you by email and/or an update in our frequently asked questions section of the website with your question. Please make sure to include your name in the question. We also want to let you know that there will be a 20-second delay, which is standard for Microsoft events. We'll now go over some tips for navigating our Clean Energy website and for participating in today's Microsoft Live event. In January, we hosted our first public open house. The second open house was held in February and the third in March. The recordings, presentations, and transcripts can be found at dtecleanenergy.com in the Clean Vision Plan section of the website. On the right side, you will see an area called Open Houses. This is where we post the content for all public open houses after they occur. Let's now talk about a few helpful tips for today's meeting. To turn on closed captioning, look at the lower right corner of the Teams screen for a button marked CC in all caps. Click on the button to turn on and off captions. To ask a question, you can click on the thought bubble with the question mark on the top right corner of the screen. Well, that's it for housekeeping, so let's move on to the agenda. For today's agenda, we're going to provide a brief recap of the first open house and review the survey feedback. Then we'll hear about DTE's approach to coal plant retirements and transitions, which we call Retire with Pride. Pride stands for people, respect, integrity, dignity, and engagement. Following that presentation, we'll learn about how DTE is modernizing the electric grid to improve reliability. We will conclude the open house with a live question and answer session. As a reminder, please remember to check DTEcleanenergy.com for updates on the Clean Vision Plan. I will now introduce panelists for today's open house. Today we'll hear from Joyce Leslie. She is Director of Business Planning and Development at DTE. Also Brian Kincaid, he is the South Area Plant Director at DTE. Ed Carpiel is Manager of Business Performance at DTE. And also on hand to answer questions is Laura Mickelin, the IRP Manager. I will now hand it over to Joyce Leslie to get us started. Joyce?
Pete, and welcome everyone. I want to thank you for attending this fourth and final session of DTE Electric's Clean Vision Open House. My name is Joyce Leslie. I am the Director of Business Planning and Development. So my teams focus on long-term electric generation strategy, which includes the integrated resource plan. I'm really looking forward to today's meeting. So I'm going to start by giving a quick recap of DTE Electric's carbon emission targets and briefly describe what an integrated resource plan or an IRP is. Then I'll show you the results from the first public open house survey that helped inform the content for today's meeting. So DTE believes that climate change is one of the defining public policy issues of our time, and we're committed to getting as clean as we can, as fast as we can, while taking reliability and affordability into account. We were one of the first electric utilities in 2017 to announce carbon reduction targets, and since then, we've updated these targets 3 times. So as you can see from page 8, DTE Electric's net zero goal includes reducing carbon emissions 50% by 2028, 80% by 2040, and ultimately reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So we have a pretty good line of sight to an 80% reduction by 2040. Our Clean Vision Plan includes our investment in state-of-the-art natural gas generation and continuing to expand renewables while retiring coal plants and promoting energy efficiency and demand response to reduce emissions. We're also upgrading our electric distribution infrastructure to support clean energy now and be ready for emerging technology in the decades to come. You're going to hear more about this later. And finally, we are offering customers affordable ways to go even further through voluntary clean energy programs like My Green Power. While we don't have a fully vetted pathway to net zero defined today, we are starting to figure out our best way to get there. Things like advancing new and emerging technologies and continuing to prioritize affordability and reliability as we move towards a net zero carbon future, recognizing that transitioning in a reliable and affordable way should be thoughtful and deliberate. So what is an IRP, or Integrated Resource Plan? So at the first public open house, we discussed in detail what an Integrated Resource Plan is. So today I'm just going to give you a couple highlights. An IRP is a regulatory filing that's made to the state of Michigan, more specifically the Michigan Public Service Commission. An IRP outlines a utility generation plan for how it will provide energy to its customers over the next 5, 10, and 15 years. It describes how a utility intends to meet the customer needs reliably and cost effectively. Now, because there's so many different ways to meet these needs, the IRP is the most comprehensive process that utilities have to see how much energy efficiency, along with resources like solar, wind, storage, demand response, or any alternative resources are needed, and when we can retire coal plants all in one place. So we do plan on filing an IRP later this year. So guiding our decision-making process are some overarching objectives. So we're going to get into these in a second. But an IRP considers not only generation or the resources that are needed to meet customer demand, but we also consider transmission and distribution. So transmission lines are the long cable lines or conductors on the tall towers that you often see running alongside highways. Transmission lines are high voltage lines carrying large amounts of power from generation centers to places like substations, where the power is then distributed to homes and businesses through the distribution grid. Now, the distribution grid includes substation, poles, and distribution lines you often see near your homes and businesses. So the distribution lines are low voltage lines that carry electricity from the substation to residential and commercial end user. So for transmission, utilities must analyze how their plan impacts the transmission system. So in DTE's service territory, the transmission lines are owned and managed by ITC Holdings. So we work closely with them through the Clean Vision Plan and work with them through our modeling and analysis. Now, the generation team also works with our distribution planning team to identify opportunities to collaborate. Now, this could be distribution programs that support generation. Another way that we work collaboratively together was earlier last year, we determined and identified objectives that could be aligned to both generation and distribution planning. So we identified 5 objectives. These objectives are safe, reliable and resilient, affordable, customer accessibility, and community focus, and clean. So safety is a top priority for DTE. Our objective is to build, operate, and maintain a fleet in a manner that ensures the safety of the public and our workforce and meets all state and federal requirements. Now, reliable and resilient, having a power grid that's both reliable and resilient with minimal equipment outages and disruptions to our customers. Affordability, providing efficient and cost-effective service to our customers. Fourth, we have customer accessibility and community focus, providing flexible energy options to customers and ensuring timely that we have two-way communication with customers and stakeholders in all communities. And then last is clean, operating our system in an environmentally sustainable manner and achieving net zero carbon emissions further enabling a decarbonized economy in Michigan. So these planning objectives are common across the electric organization and guide both generation and distribution strategic investments. So the IRP focuses on generation. DTE Electric also has a distribution grid plan that was filed with the state late last year that addresses the needs of the distribution grid to deliver reliable and affordable energy to our customers. We're going to get into this a little bit more in a few minutes. So let's move on to the survey results. Next page, please. So at the first public open house we held in mid-January, we polled the audience for feedback on what areas relative to the Clean Vision Plan are you interested in hearing more about in future meetings. As you can see on the chart on page 11, here are the results from the survey. On the left side of the chart in green, you can see some of the areas that received higher responses. So based on this feedback, we talked about renewables and emerging technology at the February open house. At last month's open house, we discussed customer demand side programs like energy efficiency and demand response, as well as My Green Power, which I mentioned is our voluntary renewable energy program. If you're interested in learning more about any of these topics, please go to dtecleanenergy.com. We have recordings, transcripts, and presentations available. We also have a few short videos you can watch to learn more about a wind and solar park and how to save energy in your homes and business. Now today, we're going to be highlighting coal plant retirements and transitions, or what we refer to as Retire with Pride. Pete had mentioned PRIDE stands for people, respect, integrity, dignity, and engagement. And we're also going to discuss the distribution modernization and reliability. So let's get into today's topics. So today we're going to focus on coal plant retirements and transitions. This initiative seeks to ensure a thoughtful, dignified transition of the power plants, the employees, and their host communities. We will then discuss the work that DTE is doing to prepare for a reliable and clean grid of the future. So Brian Kincaid, plant director at DTE, will present an overview of DTE's approach to the coal plant retirements and employee and community transitions. And then Ed Carpeel, manager of business performance, will provide an overview of the grid modernization and reliability. So modernizing our electric grid will complement our Clean Vision Plan's transition to cleaner, more reliable, and affordable energy. Brian, over to you.
Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Kincaid. I'm the plant director of the South Area facilities here at DTE. Before we discuss the Retire with Pride initiative, I'd like to provide some background on our most recent and future coal plant retirements. At the first public open house in January, we reviewed DTE's accelerated retirement of 3 coal plants, River Rouge, St. Clair, and Trenton Channel. These plants were identified for closure in 2023 and were moved to 2022. We closed River Rouge in 2021, which was a year earlier than I just mentioned, and St. Clair and Trenton Channel will close next month. We also plan to end the use of coal at our Bell River Power Plant by 2028, 2 years earlier than originally planned, and at Monroe by 2040. The sequential retirement of our coal-fired plants is a key part of our Clean Vision Plan. These plants make up a significant portion of our generation fleet. And we recognize that these plants and the employees who operate them every day have been a part of the communities they're in for nearly 100 years. They've played an important role in both DTE Electric's and the state of Michigan's history. With that in mind, we want to make sure that we put forth a thoughtful, dignified transition of these power plants for our employees and their host communities. So in preparation for plant retirements, DTE senior leaders and the energy supply leadership overseeing power plant operations established a vision for retiring our coal plants. The word cloud you see here are the attributes that were identified as being critical to our vision. We call our vision Retire with Pride, which stands for people, respect, integrity, dignity, and engagement. Let me explain the importance of each of these words. We want to make sure we support our people, who are our most important resource. We look to respect the legacy and contribution of these plants. We want to retire them with integrity, ensuring we do so with transparency and trust. We have a deep sense of the intrinsic value of the plants, and we want to retire them with dignity. And we plan to engage our employees and community in what we do and how we do it. While there are benefits that may come with the retirement of a power plant, there are also impacts to employees and communities that call for us to partner with stakeholders and manage this process closely. I will now speak to how we're working with two critical stakeholder groups, mainly the employees and communities, to manage our coal plant retirements and transitions. First, what does Retire with Pride mean to DTE's employees? DTE is developing an employee transition strategy that will ensure all employees continue to have the opportunity to contribute to DTE's success while also delivering energy that is safe, clean, affordable, and reliable for its customers. DTE intends to deliver on this commitment through several measures that include collaboration with union leadership, workforce reskilling, and employee redeployments. We have stood up an employee transition team to help impacted employees stay engaged and informed throughout this plant retirement process. The transition team is dedicated to workforce planning, employee development, onboarding, communications, and change management to help with workforce reskilling and employee redeployments. Earlier, I mentioned that we retired the River Rouge Power Plant in 2021 and that St. Clair and Trenton Channel Power Plants will retire next month. We transition employees from the River Rouge plant and are actively working with the employees at St. Clair and Trenton Channel. Most of the focus has been on redeploying these employees to other power plants with a focus on balancing employee and enterprise needs. As DTE continues to reduce carbon emissions and retire coal-fired power plants, we will continue building on this successful framework to support employees through the transition. Continued labor union partnership and support will also be critical as the industry continues to transition. In addition to expanding efforts to redeploy and transition employees, which remains critical, we will need to explore reskilling employees and transitioning to existing similar jobs will become more limited over time. For example, we are building on our efforts to explore new opportunities for impacted employees within natural gas and electric distribution. In addition to our employees, we are also continuing to work closely with the communities impacted by these plant closures. This isn't new for us. We've partnered with local communities on our past coal plant retirements. In 2014, DTE sold the Marysville Power Plant to a commercial development company to support the city with redevelopment of the riverfront property. In 2016, again, DTE matched 2 federal economic development grants to assist St. Clair County and the city of Harbor Beach redevelopment property following retirements of DTE coal-fired power plants. And DTE recently donated a small parcel of land from the River Rouge Power Plant site to the city of River Rouge to support waterfront activities. As we work to safely decommission our recently retired plants and upcoming retirements, we're working closely with community leaders, government officials, and local businesses to foster development and investment within impacted areas and maintain a presence in the community through volunteerism initiatives. For example, we work with River Rouge community and have put in place mentoring programs at the local high school, helped the city with grant writing proposals, and planted trees in the parks. DTE has also partnered with the state of Michigan's Treasury Department and local communities to support economic development initiatives in the Downriver region. Some of the key groups we're working with as part of the Downriver Economic Development Collaboration effort are listed here on this slide. DTE is also committed to ensuring environmental protections are incorporated into the decommissioning or dismantling of these facilities to support future revitalization and redevelopment of the property. We recognize that we have a big task ahead of us and understand that these retirements are going to affect our employees and the surrounding community. Through proactive, intentional planning and collaboration with stakeholders, we believe any potential negative impacts can be minimized. I encourage anyone that is interested in learning more to contact us via email or through dtecleanenergy.com website. If you have questions about Retire with Pride, please submit them at any time and we'll address them during the Q&A session. Next, let's turn to our second presentation, Ed Carpiel, Manager of Business Performance at DTE. He will provide an overview of grid modernization and reliability. Modernizing our electric grid will complement the Clean Visions plan, transitioning to cleaner, more reliable, and affordable energy. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Brian. Again, my name is Ed Carpiel, and I'm the Manager of Business Performance at DTE. I'm going to talk about the improvements DTE is making to the electric grid to transform it into the grid of the future. Before I get to that, let me first provide an overview of DTE's electric grid, or what we refer to as the electric distribution system. After energy is generated at a power plant or wind farm, it travels along high voltage transmission lines to places like substations. The power is then converted to a low voltage and distributed to homes and businesses throughout the distribution system. Transmission lines are the long cables or conductors on the tall towers that you often see running alongside highways. My presentation is focused on the distribution system, which includes substations, poles, and distribution lines you often see near homes and businesses. As you can see here, DTE's distribution system is vast and comprised of more than 31,000 miles of overhead circuits, 16,000 miles of underground cable, 1 million poles, about 700 substations, and about to serve our 2.2 million electric customers. Now, much of DTE's electric grid was designed and built more than a century ago to provide customers with the energy required for a much simpler day-to-day life. Our grid must now be adapted to the 21st century to accommodate increasingly severe weather events, meet changing customer expectations, and integrate new advanced technologies. Last year, DTE developed a robust distribution grid plan, which is the first step on our journey towards the grid of the future. Let's review what is in our plan. Our plan is organized around 4 strategic pillars: tree trimming, infrastructure resilience and hardening, infrastructure redesign and modernization, and technology and automation. I'm going to walk through each of these 4 areas. Removing trees and trimming branches away from power lines has a significant impact on reliability because trees are responsible for almost all the time our customers are without power during extreme high wind events. In areas where tree trimming has been completed, communities have experienced, on average, a 60% fewer outages. Infrastructure resilience and hardening programs also make our grid more resilient to severe weather. For example, we will be piloting and evaluating opportunities to strategically underground areas of the system to provide enhanced resiliency. Infrastructure redesign and modernization projects will support the increasing demand for electricity from customers and businesses moving towards electrification, including the increase in electric vehicle charging. Finally, technology and automation efforts will support a smarter, more efficient grid, along with customers increasing adoption of rooftop solar and storage technologies. As I mentioned earlier, much of DTE's electric grid was designed and built more than a century ago and must now be adapted to the 21st century to accommodate increasingly severe weather events, meet changing customer expectations, and integrate new technologies. Our customers and their energy usage are beginning to paint a picture that provides us signals that the grid must change. For example, we're seeing traditional 24/7 generation being replaced by intermittent renewable generation like solar and wind. You heard about this during the second public open house, where Vielka presented an overview of DTE's renewable projects. Proliferation of energy resources that are distributed throughout the grid and are capable of pulling energy from and sending energy back into the grid. Examples of this are rooftop solar and electric vehicle charging. A strong desire for customer demand-side management resources like energy efficiency and demand response, or demand flexibility. These programs were featured during the third open house in March. And finally, we're seeing high electric demand in concentrated areas, primarily driven by electric vehicle growth. This future grid will provide increased flexibility and capacity to accommodate increasing demand, as well as more dependent and reliable energy to power an electrified economy. We also believe such a grid of the future is essential to improve customer satisfaction and ultimately support customers, DTEs, and the state of Michigan's carbon reduction goals. So how does our plan impact our customers? These planned investments will improve reliability, minimize more costly power outages, and allow DTE to build and operate a clean, affordable, reliable, resilient, and accessible grid that will support the evolving needs of our customers and the state of Michigan well into the future. We expect the investments included in our distribution grid plan to result in a 55% reduction in outage minutes for customers, as well as a $70 million reduction in annual outage costs. In addition, the investments will also increase electric capacity in Southeast Michigan to support the needs of customers and businesses moving towards electrification. Not only will these investments help create a more reliable and cleaner grid, they will also contribute to continued economic development in the region. And that concludes my presentation. I look forward to answering any questions. Back to you, Pete.
Thank you, Ed. As a reminder that today's presentation on Retire with Pride and grid modernization and reliability can be found on our website at dtecleanenergy.com. Again, that's dtecleanenergy.com. We'll now transition to the question and answer session. All of your questions are important to us, and we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. You may also see responses to questions posted directly in the Q&A channel on the right side of the screen. And if you have a question that isn't already there, now's a great time to type it in. Please remember to include your full name. So we'll start with the first question for you, Joyce, and pardon me if I turn my head, I have the questions over on this other screen. Joyce, can you talk a little bit about net zero emissions and what does net zero mean?
Sure. So net zero means that any carbon emissions created by our generation resources are balanced by taking the same amount of carbon emissions out of the atmosphere. So net zero is achieved when the amount of carbon emissions added is no more than the amount taken away.
Thank you, Joyce.
Yep.
I'm going to turn to Brian for a question. So Brian, if you're ready, you mentioned that DTE is supporting economic development initiatives in the Downriver region. Can you elaborate on this?
Sure, Pete. Yeah, to answer that one, DTE is partnering with the state of Michigan's Treasury Department, a number of municipal governments, and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, nonprofit organizations, and others to support downriver communities that will be impacted by the retirements of both River Rouge and Trenton Channel power plants. The group did submit a proposal for federal funding and expects to receive a decision later this year, actually.
Great, thank you. I'm going to quickly look over at the Q&A here. So I want to remind people, if you have a question, please drop it into the Q&A session. It looks like Ed got a new question on grid modernization. So Ed, can you elaborate a little bit more on grid modernization? Oh, sorry, let me give you a little bit more on that to work on. How will the modern grid be installed without impacting the existing grid?
Sure, thanks, Pete. So just perhaps an example of some of the investments in our grid modernization plan include continuing the tree trimming surge, infrastructure investments like rebuilding substations, poles, wire, and investing in smart technologies to help detect and prevent large-scale interruptions. And I guess maybe I would say that most of our projects we rebuild the system, and keep power on at the same time, right? We're always rebuilding substations, upgrading our lines, and people don't know in the background that we are making these. That we're out in their territory rebuilding their lines, but as operationally we're capable of upgrading our system, in flight, I suppose, while power remains on and without interrupting customers.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
And then I think, like we mentioned, all the go back to all the pillars, right? The tree trimming, the resilience and hardening, the technology. All these are ongoing programs that impact the system.
Okay, I'm going to ask Laura to come on, and if you could, I have a question for you. And this one is really about sort of the inner workings of how IRPs are put together. But we have a what we call a distributed operation team, which is really the electric company, and then the IRP team, which is a group of people who work in the regulatory field. How do those teams work together to come up with the IRP plan?
Sure, Pete. So the planning objectives that were presented earlier by Joyce, those apply to both the distribution grid plan, which focuses on the energy distribution resources, as well as they also apply to the integrated resource plan, and that plan focuses mostly on the generation resources. So these planning objectives, just as a reminder, are safe, reliable, and resilient, customer accessibility and community focus, affordability, and clean. In addition, the overall scenario features, so there's assumptions that go into our model on the IRP side. So these overall scenario feature assumptions are aligned between both groups, the DO group and the IRP team. Some of these future assumptions that I'm referring to, that would include the load forecast, so that would be consistent in both plans, as well as, for example, electric vehicle assumptions for the future 10-15 years out into the future. The DO group also models the subtransmission and their distribution system, and they provide some of these optimized results to our team, which we then input into our models. And then I guess one final thing that they do is they provide some expertise and inputs for some of the different technology of some alternatives that we model in our IRP model.
Great, thank you, Laura. I do have a question for Joyce that's been entered, and the questioner says, I think I heard you say Monroe Coal Plant will retire in 2040, and the Bell River plant will retire in 2028. And DTE is looking at expediting those retirement timelines in the next Clean Vision plan. Is that correct? And can you speak to that?
Sure. So yes, the current retirement dates are 2040 for Monroe, and then the retirement of Bell River on coal in 2028. And these dates will be evaluated in the upcoming as well as future Clean Vision plans. So any decisions we make around plant retirements are considered very carefully. We look and really think about how we balance decarbonization, affordability for our customers, and reliability, and keep those factors top of mind as we think about our retirement dates.
Thank you, Joyce. Right now, I don't see any additional questions in the queue. I want to remind our listeners again, or our viewers again, that if you'd like to answer a question, you can post it in the Q&A section of our webcast here. We'll give it a couple more minutes to see if we have any more questions. Okay, it looks like we don't have any additional questions. I want to remind all of our viewers today that if you do have additional questions, please enter your contact information by sending us an email or submitting your question via the form at dtecleanenergy.com. Again, we have no more questions, so I think we'll wrap things up. I'd like to thank all of our participants for joining us today, and I'd like to thank all of the viewers for joining us today and for sharing your interest in our clean energy plan and really what will ultimately be your energy. So thank you very much, and I think that concludes our program.